Welcome to TTIOT, the show that proves anyone can have opinions. Have you ever really stopped to think about the unseen giants behind the devices in your hands? Well, here's a story you probably haven't heard. Today, we look into Foxconn and explore where your device really comes from. Let's get this circus started.
Have you ever really stopped to think about the unseen giants? The ones, building the devices that are just constantly in our hands or on our desks, that are everywhere.
Exactly.
From the smartphone that wakes you up to the laptop you might be working on right now, there's an incredibly high chance a company called Foxconn played a critical role, formerly known as Hanhai Technology Group.
And most people probably haven't even heard the name Hanhai, but they definitely know the products.
Precisely. We're talking about the world's largest contract manufacturer of electronics. I mean, just to give you a sense of the scale here, it's one of the largest employers globally.
Truly colossal, a massive enterprise that really underpins so much of our tech-driven world, the economic footprint, the production capacity. It's just staggering to think about.
It really is. But, well, as you might expect with an entity of this immense size and influence, the story behind those gleaming gadgets, it's far more complex than just manufacturing efficiency.
Oh, absolutely. Complexity is definitely the word.
This company has faced an equally massive number of controversies and challenges throughout its history. So today, our deep dive is really designed to navigate this substantial stack of sources. We have articles, reports, in-depth investigations to try and pull out the most important insights into Foxconn's fascinating and, I have to say at times, deeply troubling journey.
Right. And what we're going to explore today, it isn't just about one company, is it? It's more like a crucial lens, a way to view that intricate, often challenging balance between the relentless demands of global manufacturing, the sometimes, unbridled ambition of economic development, and maybe most importantly, the profound human cost of production.
That human cost element is key.
It is. Our mission today really is to help you understand not just what happened in these various incidents and situations, but why it matters, the specific details, the context behind these challenges, and what they ultimately mean for the broader landscape of electronics manufacturing and, the global supply chains that deliver products right to your door.
Exactly. We're going to pull back the curtain on, well, pretty much everything. From grave concerns about working conditions and, yes, tragic events at their factories in Asia.
Which got a lot of headlines.
They certainly did. To the ambitious yet, dramatically scaled back projects right here in the U.S.
The Wisconsin story, yeah.
That whole saga. And even unsettling incidents like food poisoning crises at their facilities over in India. It's a comprehensive look. And we're drawing directly from the reliable information in our sources at a company that is, really without exaggeration, truly at the very heart of our modern tech world.
It's central, no doubt about it.
Okay, so let's really start unpacking this.
Yeah.
When we talk about Foxconn, probably one of the most immediate and frankly consistently recurring themes in all our sources is the intense scrutiny, the focus that has continually surrounded their working conditions and labor practices.
Persistent is the right word.
Yeah, it's a narrative that isn't just recent. It stretches back years, even decades, doesn't it?
It really does, and it's quite striking, isn't it? What's fascinating here isn't just that these allegations exist, but their sheer consistency over such a long period.
Right.
They seem to span multiple regions, different product cycles, various types of complaints. It suggests this isn't just a string of isolated incidents. It really points towards more systemic issues, things that have proven incredibly difficult to address, despite, public pressure, internal audits, even Foxconn's own stated efforts.
So it hints at something more fundamental in their operational model, or maybe the industry itself.
Could be both. It
Yeah.
suggests something fundamental is creating these persistent challenges, yeah.
So if we look back sort of to the early days of this scrutiny, what kind of fundamental concerns were actually surfacing back then? Our sources repeatedly highlight accusations of, well, deeply poor working conditions. Were these just vague complaints or were there specifics?
Oh, not vague at all. The reports were quite specific, actually. We hear repeated allegations of excessively long working hours. That's almost a classic concern in high-volume manufacturing, isn't it?
Standard issue, almost.
Almost. There were also perceived issues of discrimination, particularly against mainland Chinese workers compared to those from Taiwan or maybe other regions, which could create internal divisions.
Interesting.
And then just a broader lack of positive working relationships reported, suggesting, a challenging workplace culture overall. What's particularly telling, I think, is that even an Apple Inc. audit way back in 2007.
That early.
Yes, quite early in their massive growth phase. While it largely found compliance in many areas, it did actually substantiate some of these specific allegations. So that tells us these problems weren't just, rumors flying around. They were observed realities, confirmed even by their most important client.
That's a crucial point. It signals these weren't just external criticisms hitting a wall, but issues confirmed by internal processes, and quite early on, as you say. How do you think these issues managed to persist then, especially if a major client like Apple was already aware?
Well, you really have to consider the environment, right? We're talking about a high-pressure manufacturing sector where deadlines are absolutely relentless, especially with things like new product launches.
Immense pressure.
Immense. Production quotas are huge, and any delay can literally mean billions in lost revenue for their clients, for Apple, for Dell, whoever. In that kind of high-stakes setting, efficiency often becomes the paramount concern, sometimes, maybe often, at the expense of employee welfare.
The bottom line drives everything.
It can. And a large hierarchical structure, particularly in a multinational operating across different cultures, can also inadvertently create divisions or, allow issues to fester if they're not proactively and consistently managed right from the top down. Plus, the drive for continuous cost reduction plays a significant role, too. Every saved minute, every fraction of a cent per unit, it adds up enormously at Foxconn's scale.
And it seems that intense pressure, as you describe it, sometimes led to even more extreme situations. Our sources highlight a particularly stark report, this one published by a consortium of 20 universities from Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China, a big group.
Yeah, that was significant.
In this report, it went so far as to directly describe Foxconn factories as labor camps. I mean, that's incredibly strong language. What specifically did they uncover to warrant such a severe description?
That phrase, labor camps, it really grabs your attention, doesn't it? And the report, well, it didn't mince words. It highlighted what it called widespread worker abuse and illegal overtime.
Illegal overtime.
So breaking the law.
Exactly. This wasn't just about long hours. It was about hours that apparently broke local laws and seemed to disregard basic human limits. And to further solidify these claims, remember that 2012 audit, the one commissioned by Apple but conducted by the Fair Labor Association, the FLA.
Right, the independent one.
That audit corroborated many of these concerns, providing a sort of independent verification. And what did that FLA audit specifically find? What were the conditions like that they actually documented on the ground?
Well, the FLA audit found that workers were routinely subjected to what it actually termed inhumane overtime bouts of up to 34 hours without a pay increase.
34 hours. Straight.
Imagine that. Working for 34 hours straight, basically a day and a half, with no extra compensation. That kind of relentless schedule, it doesn't just push human endurance to its absolute limit.
Yep. Okay.
It also has chilling implications. The FLA audit suggested that debilitating workplace accidents might also be common within these environments, which you'd almost expect as a direct consequence of exhaustion and the incredibly fast pace of production.
Yeah, makes sense.
When workers are pushed to those extremes, their focus, their reaction times, their overall safety, it's inevitably compromised.
The sheer scale of that overtime, combined with the lack of proper pay, it really speaks volumes about that intense, almost relentless pressure cooker environment of electronics production cycles. These aren't just, minor tweaks to a schedule. They're extreme demands pushing human endurance right to its breaking point. It truly shows how deeply ingrained these practices must be.
Yeah, ingrained, yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, one of the most disturbing revelations from our sources concerns the reality of underage workers. This is shocking. In a stunning admission back in October 2012, Foxconn itself confirmed that 14-year-old children had actually worked at a facility in Yantai, Shandong province.
Children?
14-year-olds. They were brought in as part of what was described as an internship program. How does a company of Foxconn's size, its visibility, allow such a clear violation to even happen?
It is a fundamental breach, isn't it? I mean, it explicitly violated China's minimum age of 16 for legal workers. No gray area there. Foxconn's stated reason for this, well, egregious breach, was a labor shortage, which, okay, maybe that's a pragmatic explanation from a business standpoint, but it simply doesn't excuse the fundamental legal and ethical violation.
Not at all.
It really highlights the immense pressure again, doesn't it? Pressure to meet production targets, particularly during peak seasons. And it suggests that maybe on-the-ground management might resort to pretty desperate measures. We often see these internship programs used almost as a loophole where students often from vocational schools, get pushed into factory labor that has very little to do with their actual education, and often under less stringent labor protections.
And it wasn't just a one-off incident either. The Financial Times reported a similar situation again in November 2017. This time, students were found working 11-hour days at an iPhone X plant in Henan province.
11-hour days for students.
Yeah, again, exceeding the legal 40-hour-per-week limit for children. And it wasn't until after this report was made public that Foxconn apparently halted this illegal overtime. What does this pattern tell us? It seems reactive, not proactive.
It really does reveal a persistent challenge in oversight and enforcement, doesn't it? Both internally within Foxconn and externally from regulators. The fact that these violations often seem to come to light only through external scrutiny, like these journalistic investigations, it raises a critical question. How do such fundamental violations of labor law and, frankly, basic ethical standards happen and then reoccur within a company of this immense size?
Yeah.
What does it tell us about those pervasive pressures on the ground? The pressure to meet extremely demanding production targets, particularly for high-profile, time-sensitive products like new iPhones, it suggests a system where maybe the pursuit of output can sometimes override basic human protections, and perhaps internal compliance mechanisms might be insufficient without that external pressure cooker.
Beyond just the hours and the age restrictions, there are the very real, sometimes devastating consequences of working in these demanding environments. Injuries. Our sources highlight a particularly poignant case from October 2012 involving a 26-year-old worker named Zhang Tingzhen.
Ah, yes, a tragic story.
He suffered an electric shock and then a fall, resulting in severe brain damage. But his story gets even more troubling when you look at the aftermath. His family struggled for justice and compensation.
What's especially concerning in Zhang Tingzhen's case is the immense power imbalance that became so starkly apparent. His family struggled to secure appropriate compensation, and our sources indicate that Foxconn reportedly threatened to cut off funding for his ongoing medical treatment if he wasn't assessed for disability in a specific city they designated.
Seriously, they threatened to cut funding.
That's what's reported. And this was a critical demand, but doctors vigorously protested it, citing the significant health risks involved in moving a patient with such severe brain injuries. This alleged tactic, well, highlights a deeply troubling ethical implication, doesn't it? A large corporation potentially leveraging its immense resources and financial power to influence outcomes in its favor, even potentially at the clear expense of a severely injured worker's well-being and basic dignity. It puts unimaginable pressure on families who are already vulnerable.
Unconscionable, really. And the allegations of forced overtime, they continued to surface even after these highly publicized incidents. In February 2015, an official with the All-China Federation of Trade Union, the ACFTU, which, just for context, is the only legal trade union in mainland China, publicly alleged that Foxconn forced employees to work overtime, and that this led to occasional tragic deaths by karushi.
Deaths from overwork.
Exactly, that Japanese term. Or even suicide.
This allegation introduces a critical nuance, doesn't it? Foxconn, in response, countered this by stating that workers often wanted to work overtime to earn more money.
The they want it argument.
Right. Now, that raises a very important question. When is overtime truly voluntary? Is it really a genuine choice when base pay might be insufficient to meet basic living expenses, or when there's an implicit, maybe even explicit expectation from management to work longer hours, especially during those peak production cycles?
It's coercive, potentially.
It can be. And the cultural context of Karchi in East Asian societies, where extreme dedication to work can sometimes be culturally valorized or even expected, adds another layer of complexity. It's not simply a matter of individual choice when you have systemic economic pressures and cultural expectations all pushing in the same direction, creating a subtle but powerful form of coercion.
And here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, a bit unsettling for me. These issues, they aren't just historical footnotes. They're not things of the past. They've continued to surface even in very recent years, demonstrating these persistent challenges for Foxconn. We saw this vividly, for instance, with that significant COVID-19 outbreak at Foxconn's Zhengzhou Technology Park, the huge iPhone city, in late 2022.
Oh, yeah, that was major news.
It wasn't just a health crisis. It rapidly escalated into widespread social instability.
Exactly. The outbreak led to incredibly harsh restrictions within the factory complex, this sort of bubble management where workers were essentially isolated, locked in.
Or a closed-loop system.
That system. And the situation escalated dramatically. Workers were literally escaping the complex on foot, trying to get back to their hometowns. This culminated in those highly publicized clashes with law enforcement and facility security. We all saw those dramatic videos circulating online.
Yeah, they were everywhere.
And the specific triggers for those clashes, it wasn't just the health risks of the pandemic itself, though that was part of it. Critically, it was the combination of poor living conditions within the dormitories, and we're talking about a massive complex here, housing hundreds of thousands.
Like a small city.
Exactly. And perhaps most explosively, unfulfilled salary promises for new hires. When new recruits were promised high wages to fill labor gaps caused by people leaving due to COVID fears and then found those promises broken, well, the tension just boiled over.
Broken promises on top of bad conditions. A recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it starkly underscores how global events, like a pandemic, can act as a powerful catalyst. They expose and exacerbate existing vulnerabilities in these vast supply chains and, most significantly, in labor practices. It reveals how quickly a health crisis can spiral into a profound crisis of trust and widespread worker unrest when basic needs and contractual promises are not met. This isn't just about economics anymore. It's about the fundamental social contract between an employer and its employees.
Okay, moving from the general working conditions, let's address perhaps the most widely publicized and truly tragic aspect of Foxconn's controversies. This centers around that deeply troubling spate of suicides at their facilities, particularly at the massive Foxconn city complex in Shenzhen, China.
Yeah, this period cast an incredibly dark shadow over the company, its operations, and honestly, the entire electronics industry. It drew global condemnation.
It really did.
This period truly drew immense global attention, and importantly, it forced a public reckoning. A reckoning with the profound human cost of rapid industrialization, and what many argued were, at best, incredibly harsh working conditions within those factories.
It shifted the conversation.
It absolutely did. It moved the conversation beyond just abstract labor issues to very real, devastating human lives lost. And it sparked a global discussion about the ethical responsibility of the big tech brands and their complex supply chains.
The first of these incidents that really grabbed international headlines, as I recall, occurred back in July 2009. A 25-year-old worker named Sun Dan-young died by suicide after reportedly losing an iPhone 4 prototype.
Right, the lost prototype.
And disturbingly, he also claimed he was beaten by security guards during their investigation into that loss. This early incident, while a profound tragedy on its own, unfortunately seemed to foreshadow the much larger, more devastating crisis that was about to unfold just a year later.
And that crisis truly peaked in 2010. Our sources detail that in that year alone, an alarming 14 people died by suicide just between January and May.
14 people in 5 months.
14. This unprecedented concentration of deaths in such a short period, all within or related to a single corporate campus, drew significant, sustained media attention from all around the world. The sheer volume of these events created this profound sense of crisis, and it led to intense scrutiny from international media, human rights organizations, labor groups, everyone demanding answers, accountability, and a dramatic improvement in working conditions.
Now, while 2010 was definitely the peak in terms of public and media focus, these tragic incidents weren't entirely confined to that single year, were they?
No, unfortunately not. Our sources mention that further suicides were tragically reported in 2011, 2012, 2014, 2016, and even as recently as 2018, including a 31-year-old worker, Li Ming, in Zhengzhou.
So it continued, even after the spotlight faded somewhat.
It did. And what that tells us is that while the immediate intense crisis of 2010 eventually subsided in terms of daily headlines, the underlying issues, the factors that contributed to such despair, they continued to manifest tragically over the years. It suggests that while some reactive measures might have been put in place,
The netting and so on.
exactly, the netting, the wage increases, the deeper systemic pressures, whether they were psychological, social, or related directly to the work environment, were not fully or consistently resolved. These later incidents served as grim reminders that the problem hadn't simply disappeared, but rather continued to plague the company, albeit with perhaps less global fanfare each time.
Now, in the face of this escalating crisis, particularly back in 2010, Foxconn's initial public response, well, it was met with considerable criticism, wasn't it? Our sources describe them as initially adopting a no-comment approach.
Yes, that initial strategy was indeed heavily criticized, and understandably so. In the face of such profound human tragedy and public horror, a no-comment approach was widely perceived as incredibly insensitive.
Tone-deaf, really.
Exactly, and it only exacerbated an already negative public perception. It's almost a textbook example of how a lack of transparency and a perceived lack of empathy can severely damage a company's reputation during a crisis. It suggests they either had something to hide or perhaps simply didn't grasp the severity of the situation from a human perspective.
As the crisis deepened, though, especially after the sixth suicide in 2010, Foxconn did begin to implement more reactive measures.
Yeah.
But some of these were, let's just say, highly controversial.
That's putting it mildly.
Our sources highlight that at one point they actually required employees to sign a waiver stating Foxconn would not be liable for suicides. I mean, that's just stunning.
It is stunning, and that controversial waiver was met with immediate and fierce backlash globally. From human rights groups, labor activists, the public, it was condemned across the board.
As it should have been.
And it was, thankfully, later retracted. But that particular misstep in their crisis management really highlighted a profound misunderstanding of public relations, and more importantly, it showed a concerningly legalistic rather than a compassionate approach to employee welfare. It looked like an attempt to shift blame and protect the company legally, rather than actually addressing the root causes of the despair.
Protecting the bottom line over people.
That was the perception. However, following this, more proactive interventions were eventually implemented.
Okay, so what were those more proactive interventions? What tangible steps did they finally take to try and address this awful crisis?
They ranged from the very practical to the almost symbolic, you could say. We saw measures like installing suicide prevention netting at the base of the tall dormitory buildings, literally trying to physically prevent falls, which is in itself a visual testament to the severity of the crisis, isn't it?
A horrifying visual, yeah.
They also implemented increasing wages, which was a direct response to the economic pressures workers faced, the argument that low pay contributed to the stress. And there were softer measures, too. Things like bringing in Buddhist monks for spiritual support and establishing dedicated help hotlines and counseling centers for workers. Chairman Terry Go himself publicly defended the company, stating quite emphatically at one point that they were certainly not running a sweatshop. That was a direct attempt to counter the burgeoning negative narrative that had really taken hold globally.
Those measures, especially the netting, as you said, they just paint such a stark picture of the extreme conditions that even necessitated such interventions. It's a visible reminder of the despair that must have existed.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the public outcry was palpable. It was global, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The suicide sparked intense protests by groups like Students and Scholars Against Corporate Misbehavior, or SACOM, right outside Foxconn's Hong Kong headquarters. And significantly, these demonstrations often extended to Apple stores in various cities around the world.
Targeting the brand.
Exactly, highlighting that crucial link between the manufacturer and the powerful consumer brands it served. The message was pretty clear. If you, Apple, or others benefit from these products, you also bear some responsibility for the conditions under which they are made.
And the protests weren't just confined to Asia, were they? It spread further.
No, our sources note demonstrations by workers' families and labor activists in Taipei and San Francisco as well. This global response really showcased the interconnectedness of manufacturing, the powerful consumer brands we all recognize, and the vital role of human rights advocacy in holding these huge multinational corporations accountable. It amplified the pressure immensely on both Foxconn and its clients like Apple, creating this broad call for more ethical supply chain practices.
Amidst all this tragedy and protest, an interesting and sometimes pretty contentious debate emerged around the statistics of the situation. The Economist magazine, and even Steve Jobs himself at one point, argued that, in absolute terms, Foxconn's suicide rate was actually lower than the overall suicide rates in China and the U.S., respectively. What do we make of that specific argument?
It's a statistically accurate point if you just look at the raw numbers across the entire population versus the number at Foxconn. But it's a perspective that often failed to adequately acknowledge the profound concentration of these suicides within a single company's facilities, often in specific, tightly controlled locations like Foxconn City.
Right, the cluster effect.
Exactly. It's a bit like saying the number of plane crashes is low compared to car accidents nationwide, but completely ignoring a startling cluster of incidents involving one particular airline at one particular airport. You'd investigate that cluster, wouldn't you?
Of course.
Labor activists, on the other hand, vehemently maintained that the suicides highlighted systemic labor abuses within the company, regardless of how the raw statistical comparison looked against national averages. They argued that even if the rate was technically lower, The sheer cluster indicated a specific localized problem within Foxconn's environment that desperately needed addressing.
That distinction between the raw numbers and these concentrated clusters seems critical. It really raises an important question, doesn't it? When does a statistical anomaly, or maybe a clustered series of tragedies like this, become a clear and undeniable indicator of systemic issues, particularly when you have persistent worker grievances and allegations of harsh conditions being consistently reported alongside such events?
The crucial question.
What other metrics, maybe beyond just the raw numbers, should we be looking at to truly understand the human impact here?
That's exactly the right way to think about it. Beyond just the raw numbers, we absolutely need to consider factors like the specific psychological stressors within that unique work environment. Things like, monotonous, highly repetitive tasks for hours on end, very strict, almost militaristic management styles reported by some, a perceived lack of autonomy or control over one's work, and potentially significant social isolation within those massive dormitory complexes.
Living and working in the same bubble.
Right. We also need to look at the availability and, importantly, the effectiveness of mental health support, which was clearly lacking, at least initially. High turnover rates, consistent reports of excessively long hours, the huge power imbalance between individual workers and management.
Yeah.
All of these things contribute to a much richer, more complex picture that goes far beyond simple statistics.
So the context matters hugely.
Hugely. Activists would argue, and I think compellingly, that the sheer fact that 14 people took their own lives in just a few months, in a single location, under very public and scrutinizing eyes, is itself an incredibly powerful indicator of a serious problem, regardless of how it compares statistically to national averages across a vastly diverse population of hundreds of millions. It forces us, I think, to look beyond the cold numbers and really examine the contributing factors, the specific context, and critically, the voices and experiences of those affected.
Okay, shifting gears now quite significantly from the critical labor practices and human tragedies we've been discussing in Asia, let's turn our attention to another major set of challenges for Foxconn. This time, though, in a very different geographical and political landscape.
Yeah.
The ambitious and, well, ultimately dramatically scaled back Wisconsin Valley project right here in the United States.
Yes, Wisconsin.
This venture presented a whole new set of hurdles and, frankly, a very different kind of headache for the company, didn't it?
It certainly did. This particular case study offers some profound insights into the complexities that global manufacturing giants face when they try to establish large-scale operations in developed economies, especially when massive government incentives are involved.
Billions in this case.
Billions. It really highlights the clash between political ambition, economic reality, and logistical challenges, and it demonstrates that even a company as globally dominant and experienced as Foxconn isn't immune to these powerful forces.
The project began with a truly grand vision, didn't it? Back in 2017, Foxconn announced plans for a staggering U.S. $10 billion TV manufacturing plant in southeastern Wisconsin.
$10 billion, a huge number.
And the promise was equally ambitious. The creation of up to 13,000 workers within this new facility. I mean, just to put that in perspective, the sheer scale of this investment and the number of promised jobs were absolutely unprecedented for a foreign firm attempting this kind of operation in the U.S., especially for a state like Wisconsin. It was hailed by politicians at the time as potentially transformative.
And to sweeten that deal even further, the agreement included an equally unprecedented package of state subsidies ranging from U.S. $3 billion to U.S. $4.8 billion.
$3 to nearly $5 billion in subsidies.
Yes. Our sources clearly state this was described at the time as the largest ever given to a foreign firm in U.S. history. The magnitude of that financial commitment from the state, well, it truly underscores the immense political will and, frankly, maybe the economic desperation at the time to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, particularly to a region in the Rust Belt that had seen significant industrial decline and job losses over decades. It was positioned as a flagship project for reshoring manufacturing.
Just let that sink in for a moment. Billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies. That kind of financial commitment, as you say, clearly shows the immense political will at the time to bring manufacturing jobs back, especially in politically significant regions. But almost immediately, despite all the political fanfare, skepticism started to emerge, didn't it?
Absolutely. Economists, almost right from the outset, expressed skepticism that the benefits would actually outweigh the costs of such a massive incentive package. They ran the numbers, looked at the projections, and saw a potential negative return on investment for the state taxpayers.
They questioned the math.
They did. And a key point of concern highlighted by our sources were past unfulfilled job creation claims by Foxconn and other ventures around the world. This suggested a potential pattern of overpromising and underdelivering when it came to these major expansion projects. This historical context immediately cast a long shadow over the Wisconsin proposal, with many questioning the company's true intentions and, perhaps more importantly, its capabilities for such a dramatic shift in its operations model to a high-cost environment.
And it wasn't just economic doubts being raised. Environmentalists quickly raised red flags too. What were their primary concerns about this massive project?
Their concerns were significant, yeah. Particularly, they criticized the project's exemption from a comprehensive environmental impact statement. For a project of this enormous scale, that's a massive bypass of standard procedure.
Skipping the homework, basically.
Pretty much. Specific concerns included the potential for increased air pollution from a major manufacturing facility, which would naturally have a large carbon footprint and other discharges. And perhaps even more critically, there was the plan to draw large amounts of water from Lake Michigan, a vital freshwater resource for the entire Great Lakes region.
A huge water draw.
Huge.
Right.
And this raised serious alarms about the potential long-term ecological impact and the sustainability of such an operation on a precious natural resource, particularly in an era of growing climate concern and water scarcity issues in other parts of the world.
So this really raises a fundamentally important question, doesn't it, about the inherent trade-offs between these ambitious economic development projects and essential environmental protection, especially when large-scale industrial endeavors are fast-tracked, potentially bypassing standard regulatory scrutiny like that environmental impact statement.
Exactly. It highlights the tension that often exists between the immediate promise of jobs, which is politically very attractive, and the potential long-term ecological impact that often falls to future generations to deal with.
Jobs versus the environment, the classic dilemma.
Precisely. And this became a very public battle in Wisconsin between these different priorities. Job creation seemingly at any cost versus environmental stewardship. The fact that the project was pushed through initially with such significant environmental exemptions indicated just how politically important it was considered at the time. It really put a spotlight on the potential for political expediency to overshadow careful long-term planning regarding both economic and ecological sustainability.
Well, those initial doubts, both the economic ones and the environmental ones, they proved to be somewhat prescient, didn't they? Because the grand vision eventually underwent what you could only call a great reduction, a massive downsizing.
To put it mildly, yes.
In January 2019, Foxconn began to publicly reconsider its plans to actually manufacture the large LCD screens at the facility. Why this sudden shift? Or maybe not so sudden shift.
The reason given publicly for this initial reconsideration was quite telling and frankly very predictable to many of the economists who had been skeptical from the start: high labor costs in the U.S. Right. This stood in stark contrast to their well-established, incredibly efficient, lower-cost operations back in Asia, where they have vast, experienced workforces and highly optimized supply chains built over decades. Foxconn, remember, as a contract manufacturer, operates on incredibly thin margins. Labor costs are a primary component of their expenses. The economics simply didn't add up for large-scale, low-margin LCD panel production in a high-wage economy like Wisconsin, even with billions in potential subsidies. It highlighted the fundamental economic realities that even massive political will struggle to overcome when competing head-to-head with deeply entrenched global supply chains.
And by April 2021, a new formal agreement was finally finalized between Foxconn and the state, which saw a truly dramatic scaling back of the entire project. What were the final figures after all that initial $10 billion fanfare?
The change was monumental. Our sources state that the planned investment was significantly reduced to US $672 million. That's down from the initial $10 billion.
Wow, less than 7% of the original plan.
Exactly. And the job creation figures, which were initially so ambitious at 13,000, were also drastically cut to a mere 1,454 new jobs.
From 13,000 down to under 1,500.
A huge drop. And consequently, the potential tax credits the state would provide were also slashed down to a mere US $8 million from the potential billions originally offered.
From an initial promise of US $10 billion and 13,000 jobs down to US $672 million and 1,454 jobs, and subsidies potentially in the billions down to just $8 million, that's a truly massive shift. It really makes you wonder about the initial feasibility assessments and the due diligence performed on such a high-profile taxpayer-funded project. Sounds like a real cautionary tale for economic development everywhere.
It really does.
Yeah.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, it's a powerful and frankly rather expensive lesson in the hard realities of global supply chains. It shows the immense challenges of trying to reshore large-scale manufacturing back to developed economies, even when you couple it with significant government incentives. It unequivocally underscores the persistent competitive advantage that lower labor costs, established infrastructure, and mature supply chains in regions like Asia continue to hold. It demonstrates that industrial policy, no matter how well-intentioned or how generously funded, faces severe economic headwinds when trying to force a major shift against fundamental market forces. For policymakers, it certainly became a very visible example of the limits of subsidies in the face of global economic reality.
Okay, so our deep dive really reveals that Foxconn's challenges aren't just confined to one type of issue, like labor, or one region like China or Wisconsin. They seem to be as diverse as their global operations themselves,
That's a good way to put it.
ranging from critical worker health crises, like we'll discuss in India, to the very modern threat of cybersecurity attacks and even complex geopolitical maneuvers and internal issues. Operating at this kind of scale means constantly navigating a truly multifaceted landscape of risks.
Exactly. This vast global footprint means navigating an incredibly complex and constantly evolving landscape of risks and opportunities. It's not just about the nuts and bolts of putting electronics together, it's about dealing with human factors, environmental concerns, economic realities, technological advancements like automation, and geopolitical shifts all at the same time.
A constant juggling act.
A massive one. And any one of these factors can disrupt operations significantly and have cascading effects across their entire global supply chain.
Let's turn our attention then to a very concerning incident that occurred in India back in December 2021. This one highlights how quickly a health issue can escalate into something much bigger. Our sources report that 256 workers at Foxconn's Freeparampur factory developed acute diarrheal disease.
256 workers, yeah.
And this wasn't random. It was directly attributed to food poisoning from company-provided hostile food, leading to a significant 159 hospitalizations. That's a major health crisis.
It is. And the consequences of this incident quickly spiraled far beyond just being a health crisis. A critical lack of clear and timely information from the company regarding the sick workers, their conditions, their whereabouts. It led to widespread rumors spreading rapidly among the workforce, especially among the thousands of mostly women workers who lived in those company hostels.
Fear and uncertainty breeding rumors.
Exactly. This uncertainty, combined with the actual health crisis and a perceived lack of care or transparency from management, it ignited outrage. This resulted in thousands of women workers staging protests on a national highway, blocking traffic, drawing significant media and public attention.
Wow, thousands protesting.
Yes. And these protests, unfortunately, also led to police detention and arrests, highlighting just how rapidly the situation escalated from a health crisis to civil unrest and a major labor dispute. The factory itself was subsequently shut down for a week as investigations commenced, causing significant production delays for clients like Apple.
And the findings of those investigations when they came out were pretty alarming, weren't they? What did they actually uncover about the conditions that led to this mass food poisoning?
The investigations revealed serious deficiencies in the living and dining facilities provided for the workers. They found things like rats and poor drainage in the dormitory kitchen, which immediately points to fundamentally unhygienic conditions where food was prepared. Very grim. On top of that, there were reports of overcrowded rooms and inadequate sanitation across the hostels where thousands of workers lived. This combination of factors, poor hygiene, overcrowding, lack of sanitation, and poor communication clearly illustrates the fragility of worker trust when basic living conditions and communication falter. It transformed what could have been a contained, treatable health issue into a widespread labor dispute, fueled by workers feeling their fundamental well-being was being neglected.
What's fascinating here, again, is how quickly major brand partners, specifically Apple Inc. in this case, become directly involved when incidents like this impact their supply chain and, crucially, their global reputation. What was Apple's response to this situation in India?
Apple's response was swift and firm, reflecting their sensitivity to these issues. Our sources state that Apple promptly placed the Foxconn plant on probation until corrective measures were taken and assured to the government and Apple.
Put them on probation.
Yes. This demonstrates the immense leverage that major clients like Apple exert. They aren't just buying components or assembly services, they're buying into a brand image. And any disruption or ethical lapse anywhere in their complex supply chain can severely damage that carefully cultivated image. Apple's demand for swift and thorough action from Foxconn highlights the increasing pressure on these global manufacturers to maintain not just production efficiency, but also ethical standards and basic supply chain integrity. It's a powerful example of how brand reputation is now inextricably tied directly to manufacturing conditions, even many layers removed from the final consumer.
And beyond these major headline-grabbing issues like Wisconsin or the India food crisis, Foxconn has faced a whole variety of other significant challenges that really underscore the sheer breadth of their operational complexities. For instance, just in June 2022, Foxconn announced that its Mexico-based production plant in Tijuana had been hit by a ransomware attack back in late May. This apparently disrupted production significantly. This is a very modern kind of challenge, isn't it?
It absolutely is. This specific incident highlights a growing and critical vulnerability for highly automated and interconnected global manufacturing operations everywhere. The ever-present threat of cyber attacks. A ransomware attack on an industrial facility like that can be devastating. It can paralyze assembly lines, lock down critical operational technology, the OT systems that run the machines, and impact global shipment schedules for weeks, maybe longer.
Huge financial hit.
Huge financial losses, yeah. It disrupts the entire supply chain downstream. And it's a modern challenge far removed from the traditional labor issues we've discussed, requiring a completely different set of security protocols, expertise, and investment to mitigate. It's a risk that's only going to grow as manufacturing becomes more digitized.
Then there's the issue of internal ethics, which can really erode trust from within. A 2019 Taiwan news report indicated that some Foxconn managers had apparently fraudulently used rejected parts to build iPhones. How does something like that even happen in what you'd assume is such a tightly controlled, high-stakes environment?
It's a good question. This points to potential internal ethical breaches and, frankly, serious quality control issues. It could be driven by intense production pressures, maybe a culture of cutting corners to meet demanding quotas set by clients, or even outright corruption for personal financial gain. Such incidents, if widespread, could severely erode trust, both internally among employees who see it happening and externally with crucial clients like Apple, potentially impacting the company's hard-won reputation for reliability and quality. It suggests either a breakdown in internal controls or perhaps an environment where managers felt immense pressure to achieve targets by almost any means necessary.
Another significant shift for Foxconn, and one that has profound long-term implications for global employment, is the steady rise of automation. Since about 2016, Foxconn has been actively replacing its workforce with robots.
With Foxbots.
Right. Our sources mentioned that 50% of the labor force was replaced in 2016, alone in some facilities, with ambitious plans for completely automated factories, and so-called dark factories, in the works. What does this huge push towards automation mean for the future of manufacturing jobs, especially at a company that employs so many people?
This is undoubtedly a strategic business decision for Foxconn. It's aimed at increasing efficiency, improving product consistency and quality, and crucially, reducing labor costs in the long term, especially in higher wage environments or in places where they've faced labor disputes or unrest. However, it presents a very significant and ongoing challenge for human employment, particularly in regions in China and elsewhere that have historically relied heavily on Foxconn for jobs, sometimes being the largest employer by far.
Entire cities, almost.
Entire cities, exactly. It forces a global conversation about the future of work in manufacturing, the broader societal impact of large-scale automation, and the urgent need for new skills development and retraining programs for potentially millions of displaced workers worldwide. It's really a double-edged sword. Increased efficiency and potentially lower costs for the company, but potential social upheaval and economic hardship for the workforce if not managed carefully.
On a slightly different note, and maybe demonstrating Foxconn's influence extending beyond just manufacturing, we saw them step into the public health arena during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
Back in 2021, after some public controversy regarding vaccine shortages in Taiwan, Foxconn founder Terry Gu, through his personal charity, actually joined forces with TSMC, the giant chip maker.
Another Taiwanese giant.
Right, to negotiate and purchase 10 million BioNTech COVID-19 vaccines for Taiwan, which they then donated to the government's vaccination program.
It's an interesting side note, isn't it? It really demonstrates Foxconn's considerable influence, and perhaps its founder's personal initiative, extending far beyond traditional manufacturing. GRU effectively stepped into a critical public health role during a global crisis, essentially using his corporate clout and personal connections to secure vital supplies that the Taiwanese government was apparently struggling to obtain quickly through official channels. It showcases the unexpected, sometimes blurred roles that powerful business leaders and corporations can play when governments face significant challenges, blurring the lines between private enterprise and public service.
And finally, one more major venture that didn't quite pan out as planned for Foxconn was a big semiconductor project announced for India. In September 2022, Foxconn signed a deal for a massive U.S. $21 billion semiconductor plant in Gujarat, India, this time in partnership with the Vedanta Group.
21 billion, another huge number.
Another huge number, but this one was also quite short-lived, wasn't it?
Yes, our sources confirm that Foxconn pulled out of the joint venture project in July 2023, citing various issues. This again reflects the ongoing, immense challenges of executing these massive, incredibly complex industrial projects, especially when entering new territories with potentially nascent supply chains and infrastructure for something as specialized as chip making.
Semiconductors are a different beast.
Entirely. Building a state-of-the-art semiconductor fab from scratch is incredibly capital-intensive, technically demanding, and logistically complex. Foxconn pulling out suggests that even a company with their global experience and vast resources faces significant hurdles in trying to diversify its core manufacturing capabilities, particularly into a highly specialized and strategically important field like semiconductor production. It highlights the difficulties in replicating success across different industrial sectors and geographical contexts, even for a giant like Foxconn.
This rapid tour through these sort of other challenges really hammers home the point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That operating at Foxconn's colossal scale means constantly navigating an incredibly complex, constantly evolving landscape of risks. Everything from basic human error and internal fraud to massive geopolitical shifts, environmental regulations, public health crises, and the inexorable march of technological change like automation and cyber threats. It's really a testament to both their adaptability, that they survived and thrived, but also the sheer scale of the challenges they continuously face. #tag outro. So after covering all this ground, what have we truly learned from this comprehensive deep dive into Foxconn's many controversies and challenges over the years? We've certainly seen a company that is undeniably a powerhouse in global electronics manufacturing, a true leviathan that shapes so much of our digital lives.
Absolutely essential to the tech world.
Yet one that has consistently grappled with profound, multifaceted issues right across its international operations.
That's right. From the very real and often tragic human costs associated with working conditions, the illegal overtime, the accidents, and that devastating spate of suicides that really gripped the world's attention, to the complex economic and environmental impacts of its mega projects, like that ambitious but ultimately scaled back venture in Wisconsin.
A very public scaling back.
Very public.
Yeah.
And even more recent challenges like the health crises in India, the disruptive cyber attacks we mentioned in the story of Foxconn, is truly a microcosm. It reflects the ethical, logistical, and economic dilemmas that seem inherent in our current system of global production. These controversies unequivocally underscore the significant social and ethical challenges that Foxconn, as this massive global manufacturer enabling so much of our modern world, has faced and likely continues to face across its vast international operations.
As consumers, we often only see the end result, the sleek phone, the powerful laptop, the cutting-edge tablet. But this deep dive really urges us, I think, to look far beyond that polished surface, to consider the intricate journey, the complex global supply chain, and crucially, the human stories that often lie behind every single device we hold in our hands.
And this maybe raises an important final question, something perhaps for you, our listener, to ponder. In this incredibly interconnected world we live in, where does the responsibility truly lie for ensuring ethical labor practices and sustainable development across these vast, often quite opaque global supply chains?
Yeah, whose job is it?
Is it solely with the manufacturers themselves, like Foxconn, who are often under immense pressure from clients to deliver at the absolute lowest cost? Is it primarily with the powerful brand names, the Apples, the Dells, the Sonys that design and sell the products, the ones who set the demands and ultimately control the market? Or do you, the informed consumer, also play a vital role through demanding transparency, advocating for fair practices, and ultimately holding companies accountable with your choices and your voice?
Something definitely to think about as you navigate your own digital world. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.